Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good night. However and whenever it is you may be listening, thank you for stopping into another fantabulous episode of the Take It Easy podcast, live on the Believe Podcast Network and live on YouTube, except it isn't live because it's a podcast and it isn't live on YouTube because I couldn't figure out how to get my camera on YouTube and it was pissing me off. So I decided to just make a regular video following the national championship between Kansas and North Carolina. Welcome in, everybody. We've got that coming up. We're also going to talk about the Houston Astros today, and we are going to talk with our friend Juju Talks Sports from the Slump Buster podcast about the Miami Dolphins and the way that we think about the NBA MVP. Not necessarily a talk about the MVP conversation this year, but just the way we think about the NBA MVP. We'll talk about that later on in the show. We begin with this wonderful A block talking about the college basketball national championship. And I gotta say, pretty freaking entertaining. I know as a child, when I was really investing a lot of my emotional stability in sports because it was the thing that brought me joy in a really sad childhood, an anxious childhood. And I threw myself into sports. And it's the reason why I still do this lovely podcast, is that connection I still have to sports and childhood. Back then, I invested a lot more in March Madness. Last year during the pandemic, I defaulted to my childhood ways and got really invested in March Madness again. And this year I didn't invest as much in March Madness. In fact, I said, when you have things to do, when you have priorities in your life, like myself giving a TED talk over the weekend or just spending time with people that I love and care about, you can get away with skipping the first 35 minutes of a college basketball game and just watching the final five and pretty much getting the gist of what happened in the game. Because the first 35 minutes really aren't memorable unless there's something catastrophic like an injury or a massive upset or something along those lines. I would have recommended watching the first 35 minutes of North Carolina and Kansas, though, because that was actually a really fun game. North Carolina went on a 12-0 run at the end of the first half, and they were up like 15 at halftime. It was like, Jesus Christ, North Carolina is blowing the brakes off of Kansas, and they're this Cinderella team that's pretty much dominated everyone they faced in the tournament, and Caleb Love is this magical second half warrior. And then Kansas just erased the lead in like 11 minutes. And it was like, holy shit. Okay. So even though the score was basically tied with 4 minutes left to go, and you could have basically wiped out everything that happened at the beginning of the game, it was still really kind of interesting to see. The other thing that was interesting was Hubert Davis just going crazy on the sidelines, like living and dying with every single play. And I don't remember who number 14 was. I think his last name was Johnson for North Carolina, but like that dude embodied Hubert Davis's persona, because Hubert Davis was just going crazy on the sidelines with just ridiculous high energy. And whoever Johnson was for North Carolina, that dude embodied Hubert Davis. He is one of those I will run through a brick wall, because that dude had so much energy going on in that game. So anyways, North Carolina kicks ass at the start of the game. Kansas becomes a second half team, the same thing Kansas did the entire tournament, which, sometimes they're just a second half team. And I know we talk a lot about a team goes weekend to weekend and they change when they don't have a quick turnaround time and they can play a different game. I think it's just a bit of a myth. And the team is what the team is. This is a 1-game sample size that disproves the idea of teams play weekend to weekend, especially really good teams. Kansas was a second half team all year. Their field goal percentage in the tournament improved like 25 points in the second half of games. I think they've used the Miami game and the Sweet 16 game they played against Providence and the game they played tonight, they just dramatically improve in the second half. And that just happens to be who Kansas was. And Kansas did it against North Carolina, who they were better than the entire season. But we never saw North Carolina truly look like an 8 seed, except for that second half where Brady Manick gets ejected and Baylor comes back from 25 down in like 8 minutes. North Carolina had a 15-point lead, and then they started to look like an 8 seed because Kansas was a true number 1 seed, even though I can't name anyone on the team besides McCormick, who scored the last 4 points of the game for Kansas. The team was really, really, really good this year. They also had a Braun, but he called his last name Brown, which was a little confusing. But yeah, Braun was really good for Kansas, and they win the national championship with a relative no-name team. And Bill Self gets his second championship, which you can craft the storyline out of Bill Self. Like, it's less interesting than, say, North Carolina or Duke as the storyline in the Hubert Davis and the Roy Williams. And they even led off the broadcast. Jim Nantz, like right before tip-off, was like, both of these coaches succeeded Roy Williams. And it's like, okay, well, we can make the storyline about Roy Williams, or we can make the storyline about Hubert Davis, Bill Self. All depends on what you're going for in terms of selling the nostalgia of college basketball, back when college basketball mattered to a general audience. It's just capturing that magic again while you still have it, and figure out how to evolve and change later. Because the other thing I realized is that national championship broadcast for TBS or CBS or the Turner Viacom partnership that bids on the tournament, it has not changed in like 8 years. Like, as long as I've been watching the tournament, they've just not changed anything about March Madness. It is formulaic. It is strategic. They do not innovate or change anything about the March Madness broadcast, from the first round to the corporate champions to the championship broadcast to even the graphics on the TV. You can trick me by just putting fun new graphics on the television. It's more fun that way. They haven't changed shit about March Madness in 8 years, but you can still sell the storylines, right? Sports are ultimately stakes and storylines, and every now and then fun colors on the screen that trick me into thinking that it's new and exciting. But Bill Self, I did not even know that Bill Self's dad had died in January, and that this was a team that ends up winning the national championship. I thought that was a really cool story, and I thought that would have been great to invest in, but we put all of our brain power and energy to Duke and North Carolina. Understandably, like, this was, again, the end of college basketball as we knew it, that we didn't get to invest in Kansas the way that maybe I would have enjoyed a little bit. And I know I didn't watch very much Kansas in the tournament. I watched part of them. I watched the second half of the Miami game. I didn't watch them play Providence. Do I have to go to my bracket to remember who they played? Come on, I know who they played. They played Texas Southern. I didn't watch that game, but I know they played Texas Southern, and then they played Creighton really close in the second round, but I didn't watch any of that game. So I guess I only watched the 20 minutes tonight the 40 minutes tonight plus 20 minutes against Miami of Kansas basketball all season. And maybe that's on me for not actively seeking out the Bill Self storyline, but they didn't bring it up enough to like actually get me invested in Kansas. And that's a cool story. Like, the cool story of Kansas winning the championship and McCormick looking absolutely dominant against like Baycott, who obviously got hurt at the end. By the way, one more thing that I'd like to point out